Hi, I'm Tim.
I'm Dan.
And I'm Mitchell, and we're Cut Copy, and we're here talking to Rhapsody.
I guess Cut Copy started as a home studio project for me, just learning to muck around with keyboards and samples and that sort of thing. At one point I just had the idea of starting to incorporate like guitar and that sort of thing, and Tim was a friend who played guitar and had sort of, I guess, kind of complementary musical tastes to what I was into, so yeah, he just sort of came around and started recording things, and Mitchell was his housemate at the time, so I guess when we actually came to the idea of just starting up a kind of sort of indie punk kind of garage band version of Cut Copy, like Mitchell was the go-to guy for drums.
The Cut Copy sound is kind of more of a celebration of music more so than one particular kind of style.
Always been really into sort of like guitar music, like Sonic Youth, My Bloody Valentine always, Pavement.
French house, kind of more dance music.
The music we were listening to kind of found its place in the record, perhaps just in the way that we kind of incorporated the live elements with the studio recorded stuff. A lot of the studio stuff, I guess, sort of has that sort of, you know, house touch to it, just, you know, the sort of 4/4 kick drum and you know, sort of samples and sort of filtered sounds.
I call your number but I can't get through. I'm looking for you.
After we kind of finished writing the majority of the record, like the label and us kind of started throwing around kind of ideas of producers that we could work with and stuff, and who we could collaborate with. And I think initially they were kind of searching or aiming for like a really kind of heavyweight kind of producer, like the real kind of big shot hit maker kind of producer. We were kind of happy to do that, but I think we wanted to try and find someone who was a bit on our wavelength, and obviously we'd been kind of fans of the DFA stuff since the beginning. And in particular what Tim was kind of doing at the time with all his Loving Your Hands stuff we found really interesting. Thought he could definitely handle the dance element of our sound, but also bring some more of the kind of psychedelic kind of textures that we kind of wanted to explore more on this record, say, than we did on the first. I think that's what it was more about. It was more of a psychedelic take on pop music than just the straight pop of like Bright Like Neon Love. We literally just sent the demos to Tim and he got back to us pretty much straight away, and we knew from our kind of initial conversations with him that that'd be the perfect person to work with. You know, he was never going to be overbearing or going to come in and say, hey, I'm going to put my stamp on it. He was always there to kind of serve the songs or the album first and offer us, you know, suggestions and help us sonically get what we wanted, but really kind of put it back on us to find new sounds or a way of recording or writing and arranging or whatever. And so yeah, it ended up being the perfect thing for us in the end, but also being here in New York and working in the DFA studio was, you know, something that we'd always be very interested in doing.
Cold is the sun as she wonders where he's gone.
It seems like the musical landscape in Australia has changed a lot. There's certainly a lot bigger audience there for the kind of dance music or the kind of music that we do since when we first started. And there's a lot more kind of bedroom producers that have kind of popped up in the last year or so. But it's kind of funny, like, those guys have always kind of been around, you know, like we've always had that community since we kind of started, like we always toured together and stuff. And it's kind of funny now that the rest of the world's kind of just changing their focus to Australia at the moment, so it's kind of interesting. I guess a lot of that has to do with the blogs and stuff. It almost happened while we were away, like when we were kind of overseas touring, it was kind of, you know, flooding back to Australia, which happens a lot with bands, you know, kind of hearing about what bands are doing overseas, and momentum starts to build in Australia. So we actually came back and did a tour, and our audience had almost like doubled or tripled since the last headline tour we'd done there. So it was kind of weird when we first got back, how did this happen?
And a lot of them are younger kids. It kind of feels like once that sort of happened, you know, you get to a tipping point where like you convert a lot of people, and but then it gets to a big enough scene that kids sort of, you know, turning 18, which is when you start going out to clubs in Australia, are just sort of at the moment likely to be into like, you know, dance music, rather than maybe 10 years ago would have been much more likely to be into going to see bands or going to just commercial dance clubs if they were into dance music.
Yesterday, that was just a dream.
They're kind of slightly different scenes in Melbourne and Sydney in Australia. It's probably brought about by the fact that Sydney has less venues, strange licensing laws that operate up there where it's really difficult to have a small club or bar, whereas Melbourne's always been really lucky. Liquor licences are a lot easier to get and a lot cheaper. That Melbourne's like got loads of small bars and small clubs where somebody, you can have a DJ or have a band that'll only need to draw 100 people. So it means Melbourne's got a much healthier music scene. So Sydney's a lot more about DJing and a lot less about live music, but the laws have just changed in Sydney, so maybe in a few years it'll become a bit more consistent.
Perth is the place, just because of the flight costs. People often skip them when they're doing tours of Australia. Geographically, it's the most isolated city in Australia, so they're very appreciative crowds over there, and for some reason there just seems to be a really vibrant audience for dance music. So certainly somewhere that we always try and play. We've sort of had at least as bigger crowds in Perth than we do like in our hometown, so it's pretty crazy.